Welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. My name is Carrie Slade and I'm the Assistant Academic Director of Temple's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute at the Fox School of Business. We call it the IEI. We have a great presentation with RoseAnn Rosenthal today. I'm really excited for it and I'm going to make a couple of brief announcements before we get started. So let me bring up my other PowerPoint here. Whoops. All right, so again, a big welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you, and we're going to experiment with networking after this program, so potentially we can all make connections. That's why we have this set up as a meeting and not as a webinar. So, you know, you're welcome to hide your video and mute yourself during this presentation, but then afterwards, when we go into the breakout rooms, we can show our videos and we can all network with each other. This Innovation Leader Speaker Series grew out of our master's program in Innovation Management and Entrepreneurship. Earlier, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, we developed this master's program to really teach people how to be innovative, how to manage innovation, and it helps de-risk some of those entrepreneurial and innovative decisions. We have a master's program, as I said, it's 10 classes. You can do it in 1 to 2 years, in person or online. We're not in person at the moment, but hopefully we'll be back in person soon. And then we have 3 certificates that are only 3 classes. So with 3 classes, you can get a graduate certificate in entrepreneurship, innovation strategy, or healthcare innovation. If you have any questions about that, or you want to talk to me after the program, we will actually have a breakout group for that. So you can talk to me then, or you can email me, or you can scan that QR code to get some more information. Next thing I want to highlight is our Innovative Idea Competition. The finalist event is in 2 weeks, 2 Thursdays from now. Our Innovative Idea Competition is an annual competition where students, faculty, staff, anyone, alumni from the Temple community submit ideas to be into our competition for the most innovative ideas. You don't have to have a business plan or anything like that. And we've gotten over 100 submissions this year. The reviewers are in the process of reviewing the ideas, and then we're going to judge, pick the best ideas, and announce the finalists and the winners at the event in 2 Thursdays from now. So it should be a great event if you're interested in what kind of ideas our students, faculty, staff, and alumni are coming up with. The other thing I want to highlight is the Temple University Entrepreneurship Academy, led by Professor Alan Kersner, has put together a really powerful series on reskilling the workforce. Basically, how do we take potentially low income, low education people, give them the skills they need to have sustainable jobs, sustainable incomes, and build wealth and security for their families. So we've had 2 panels. They were fabulous panels. And if you're interested, most of our talks and workshops are on our YouTube channel. So you can look up the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute on YouTube. So this series is going to culminate in a hackathon on next Friday, where we're going to have multidisciplinary teams, design thinking experts, workforce development experts, and you're going to be on a team running through ideas, running through potential solutions to potentially make some impact on this problem. So it should be a great event. And then the other event I want to highlight is our next Innovation Leader Speaker Series, November 17th, with Matrice Jackson. She works in innovation management in Kimberly-Clark Corporation, and she's going to be speaking about how to cultivate innovative talent on a team. How do you encourage your employees to find their superpower and bring it to work to make your company more innovative? So I'm really looking forward to that as well. I want to thank our sponsors, the IEI, Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute, of course, at the Fox School of Business, the Center for Student Professional Development at the Fox School, as well as the Product Development and Management Association, the Philadelphia chapter, the Innovation Research Interchange, and Technically Philly. And if you want any information on either the PDMA, the IRI, or Technically Philly, you can sign up for their newsletter, and we can provide you with some more information on those organizations as well. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce RoseAnn. I'm really excited to hear from her, and it's been a real pleasure kind of getting to know her and learning about her over the past several months. So RoseAnn B. Rosenthal is CEO, President, and member of the Board of Directors of Ben Franklin Technology Partners of Southeast Pennsylvania. She's had that role since 1996, and she has over 50 years of experience in business investment, regional planning, and economic development. She served on local, state, and national advisory boards, addressing issues of regional development and public policy, and has been widely recognized for these contributions. Currently, Ben Franklin Technology Partners has a portfolio of over 200 companies, and it's created a solid track record of seeding Southeast Pennsylvania's technology leading companies to help grow innovation and grow technology entrepreneurship in the region. Under her guidance, Ben Franklin has created more than 32,000 technology-focused jobs in the Philadelphia region for more than 2,000 companies. And the results show that this growth has enabled $5.1 billion of additional economic activity in Southeastern Pennsylvania. So a major impact there. She also helped design and launch the region's Healthcare Innovation Collaborative, which is an open innovation initiative, including universities, corporations, investors, healthcare providers, and health insurers. She also catalyzed the development of ImpactPHL, which is a regional alliance focused on social impact and the impact economy. Also, she led the formation of Broad Street Angels, an angel investor group based in the Union League of Philadelphia. She's been recognized many times, as I said, so I'm just going to name a few of her awards. In 2019, she received the Pennsylvania Society's Distinguished Citizen of the Commonwealth Award in recognition of her work. And she was also awarded awards from the National Venture Capital Association, the Community College of Philadelphia Foundation, and Temple University in 2018. Sadly for us, but potentially welcome relief for her, she did announce her retirement. So she will become CEO Emeritus of Ben Franklin Technology Partners in January, and she will become a senior advisor in July of next year. So RoseAnn, thank you so much for coming. Whenever you're ready, I can share your slides, and then we can kick it off.
Okay, I am ready. First, thank you so much, Carrie, for allowing me this opportunity to speak to these wonderful folks. I see a few friends on here, and happy to be here, especially as a Temple alum. Happy to get started anytime you're ready.
Okay, great. Let me just pull them up for you. All right, so I'm going to put these at full screen. If it seems like that's causing a problem, let me know.
Okay, no, we're good to go, it seems.
Great.
All right. So when I spoke to Carrie and Patrick about this opportunity, we talked about what we might want to address, and I tried to combine a number of themes that we talked through into a discussion about how does one catalyze or try to catalyze a regional innovation system, and then specifically talk about how we approach it at Ben Franklin. I specifically subtitled this a practitioner's view because it's not an academic study, it's not a policy document, it's just my observations and experience over the years. So it's totally open to slings and arrows as we get into the discussion. Okay, so let's move on. This is self-explanatory. Either we innovate or we will no longer be. So let's keep moving. All right, why innovate? Obvious, economies change, industries change. Look at the times that we're in now. Cultures change, populations, priorities. And so any community has to really understand that where it is today is not going to be where it's going to be tomorrow. So we have to constantly think about how we take control of that opportunity to innovate as opposed to being subject to it. Next, please. And then that leads us to the discussion today, which is why an ecosystem. And the points that I made here are ones that I've experienced in my career. Very important to develop systems that allow that rapid diffusion of information and best practices and knowledge. Very important for communities to be able to act quickly, mobilize their resources. I've been in situations here in the region where we have and we have not. And when we have not, we've suffered the consequences of not being able to mobilize quickly. So it's very important in those times that we're not challenged as much, that we really work collaboratively and try to develop that muscle in terms of interaction. It's not something that necessarily comes naturally. And so as we talk about Ben Franklin a little bit, and I'll talk about our approach, which is to build collaborations and bring people to the table pretty much in everything that we do. And at the end of the day, if you're going to create a robust ecosystem, you have to create the innovators and give them a comfortable place to be and the resources that they need, which in our case, we believe that it's very important to be able to have capital in the region to stimulate that innovation. We'll talk about that further. Next. So how do you get started? The Pennsylvania model for creating innovative communities really started with the Ben Franklin Technology Partners it'll be almost 40 years ago. And the beauty of the Pennsylvania system was that there was a recognition that that Pennsylvania is not one state. It really is several different regions with very different cultures and very different challenges and very different opportunities. And so Pennsylvania, unlike many other states that have created innovation strategies, understood that it needed to be localized, or in this case, regionalized. And so it was important for every one of the Bens, we call ourselves the Bens, to really understand our own region, and the state looks to us to know what's going on in our regions. And so I always start with really ensure that you understand the history of your region. The region, what it is today, did not happen today. It happened long ago. And the strains of how the region formed still are evidenced today. So start with the history and work through to current circumstances. Where are we today in terms of the culture, the leadership, the strengths, the weaknesses? Who gains, who loses? What are the politics? What's that framework? How do things get determined in your region? All provide input to the approach that you take to create a regional strategy. Let's go on. So how do you get started? My view has always been that you have to, once you know that analysis from the prior slide, start from the ground up. I've seen the fact that we have wasted so many years and so many discussions talking about how do we become the next Silicon Valley, or before that, Route 128. If we had taken all that time and effort when we were bemoaning the fact that we weren't 128 or we weren't Silicon Valley, we'd be much further along. The fact of the matter is, the reason that people looked at those communities was lacking, the way that they looked at them lacked the fact that they did any real work to understand what the history of those communities were. So if you have an opportunity to read or are not familiar with Margaret O'Mara's works in terms of Cities of Knowledge and more recently The Code, they're fantastic books about the history of the various innovation communities around the country, and obviously the recent one that she wrote on Silicon Valley. And once you read those, you really understand that there's no way in creation that we could have been Route 128 or Silicon Valley. And so once you understand that, then you stop lusting over what you can't be and try to figure out what you can be. That's a lot harder, but it's a lot more productive. So I really urge the historical retrospective, and then really think about what you have to work with. Okay, let's go to the next. So that's what we try to do at Ben Franklin here in Southeastern PA. And you take a look at our region, because our mandate is the 5 counties in Southeastern PA. And you take a look at the fact that we are very critical to the strength of Pennsylvania. That's where the economic strength comes from our region. Very diverse. You can read these points for yourself. We have a variety of environments, urban, suburban, exurban. We have a history of innovation here. We don't have one industry that ever dominated our region, but we also have a long institutional history, and in many cases, in many ways, that affects our receptivity to change. We're can get a little bit stuck in our behavior because of the history of our institutions. Because of the character of the businesses here, you see a very strong influence from banking, insurance, real estate, industries that are not really risk oriented. And so that affects our ability to amass capital for early stage risky companies. Back in the 80s, we lost a lot of corporate headquarters And the importance of that to us is we lost a lot of decision makers in our region. We have never had any significant federal investment in research and development here, as did Route 128 in Silicon Valley, and that had a huge, huge impact on their ability to grow their technology communities. We are blue collar dominant, and so you see those stats in terms of the percentage of population with a higher education. We obviously have very high poverty in our region, so that affects us. And then, you know, in looking through, since I'm sort of transitioning, my chairman keeps telling me, don't tell anybody you're retiring. But as I'm transitioning, I was looking through some old paperwork as I'm clearing out my office now, and going through some prior strategies in the region. And advanced tech is maybe talked about, but it has never been a priority. It still isn't a priority. I can't understand why it still isn't a priority. But if, you know, when I think back to the 80s, traveling through the Boston area, their newspapers were covering technological innovations left and right all the time. We still don't see that covered in our media. So it's just, we haven't gotten there yet that there's an embracing of innovation and technology as an important factor here. And that contributes to your strategies. Let's go to the next. Okay, so as we tell our companies when they come in with bold plans, we can't boil the ocean. And so, you know, with a huge set of responsibilities and very diverse region, a lot of needs, where do you start? And so I thought that the most important thing is figure out what you're not going to do, because we all want to do everything, because we all want to solve these problems. So we try to focus on what can we bring to the table that is unique and different, but that is missing in the region. So what do we want to do ourselves? What do we have the ability to do ourselves? But what then do we support and partner others to do? And so being clear about our goals and being clear about what we're going to look at to assess whether we've achieved those goals is very, very important. And while we have a strategy, and Professor Hagee is one of the attendees on this call I see, who's helped us think through a number of these things. So I want to give him a shout out. Very important to have a strategy, but also very important to have the ability to pivot, because there's always a project X. When I was at PIDC before Ben Franklin, there was one of our staffers managers who always talked about project X, because no matter what we decided we were going to do for the year, there was always that project. Something happened in the region, something happened politically, something happened with a major industry that caused us to throw away everything we were going to do and focus on Project X. So you have to be able to pivot quickly. And whether you're an organization or a region, regions have to do that as well. And so we'll talk about that. Let's go. Okay, so in our view, we put the entrepreneur at the center of all of our strategies. With the notion that it's the entrepreneur at the end of the day that's going to create the jobs and tax ratables. So it's the entrepreneur that, if they're successful, as you see happened in Silicon Valley, they spit out new entrepreneurs. And that's happened here. We have a very long history of chemistry and then biotechnology, and that's spun out and created our strong life sciences sector, because a lot of the original people that worked in those original companies and SmithKline and other chemical organizations then became entrepreneurs in the life sciences arena. They then begin to demand specialized input, specialized services. And so you get your legal community that begins to specialize in those issues, and your accounting community that begins to specialize in those issues, and then specialty service providers. So you begin to develop a cluster around the entrepreneur. And then the level of play begins to go up in terms of the level of sophistication that the entrepreneurs demand about these services. And so there's an upward spiraling of competency and capabilities in a region. So the entrepreneur is key for us, but then we take a look at what else has to be in place to enable that entrepreneur to succeed, and then partner to get those other things done. Let's go to the next. And so, our issue, the issue that we're tackling primarily, is the lack of pre-seed and seed stage capital for advanced technology businesses. That's where we focus. That's not the only thing that we do, but by and large, That is the focus of our activity. And then we begin to, as we assess what else that entrepreneur needs, begin to partner with others to deliver those services, and then do what we can to catalyze others to do, to take on tasks that are necessary for that entrepreneur to grow, but that it's probably best for us not to do directly. And so with that, with our focus on capital, we have grown to be the #1 seed capital investor in the region and rank across the nation as one of the top 10 early stage investors. So we're really happy about that, and are very grateful to our partners. You see our co-investment partners there, who we work with to invest capital in technologies that are specifically of interest to them. Let's go to the next slide. And so around the investment activity, it's not just dollars, but there's an absolute need to provide other services to ensure that these companies, once they're invested in, can grow. And so both in terms of our direct activity and through partnerships, we'll bring those services to the table. When we talk about, let's go to the next slide for a moment here. So in terms of partnerships, these are some that we have, we either support or have actually catalyzed that were not in existence before Ben Franklin. And they're very important. They create the infrastructure for innovation. We can't do it all. Our process has always been one of seeking partnerships, creating partnerships, supporting partnerships. And I know there's one more logo that we're going to put on here from Startup Bucks that isn't on here, but I think there's someone from Startup Bucks on this call today. So cheers to them for getting this going in the recent year or so. Yes, Jonathan, I see that note. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. Our view also and our approach is one that brings in, draws on the resources and the assets and the talent of the region to help us do what we do. We're not a black box. We're not a closed box. We have external review committees. So when companies come to us looking for our support, we bring together experts from the various technology sectors that we engage in. So life sciences, digital health, IT, advanced manufacturing. These are all volunteers from across the region that we pull together to help us make these decisions. We do the same thing when we're trying to launch a new initiative. We bring together people from the region. Why do we do that? It helps us, of course, but it also builds that interaction among folks in the region, so they get to see what's happening, what's coming up, and they get to share information with each other. So I like to think about it as, instead of a dandelion, which has a straight root, you think about ivy that grows and spreads. And so what we're trying to do is ensure that the infrastructure keeps growing, and what can we do to set in place systems that allow it to grow without our continuing to spin the plate, to mix some metaphors here. Okay, let's keep moving. So some examples of regional innovation system in action. COVID-19, talk about Project X. Nobody anticipated this, nobody wanted this. But I'll tell you, in my years of in economic development here in the region, I have never seen the region come together like I have in these past months. And I credit Dave Zellers in Montgomery County for getting us together. But literally, within the first few days, more than 40 representatives from the regional economic development partners across the 5 counties began to meet virtually every week, and really began to coordinate efforts in terms of a response to something that nobody understood. I have never seen this before. And so the ability to share information, share resources, these are counties that are all competitive with each other in terms of business location and growth. Not this time. Everybody used everybody else's systems where they had systems to deploy, to reach out to clients, to get a sense of what was going on, to develop a unified agenda that we could communicate to elected officials. It's been fantastic. It still exists, but it's moving from response to recovery now. Across the bends, across the state, we work together to advocate, to design a program, secure funds secure contract, solicit applications for funding for our young companies that were being impacted by COVID-19, where the solutions that were coming from the federal government and other programs from the state just did not apply to innovative technology companies. And so from April to June, everything was fast-tracked and put in place and done with money in the hands of our clients. So, and then we saw others, many of our companies that were restructuring their offerings and pivoting to develop support to the region and to their community. So it's been it's a horrible thing, but it's been phenomenal to see that that some of these collaborative muscles did come into play where we hadn't seen them before. Let's go to the next slide. The specific program that we launched with the Commonwealth in those 2 months, concentrated effort was what we call Save Our Startups. And so there's the stats on focusing these dollars to support the work of companies in the region that were specifically focusing on COVID. Let's go to the next. And so across the region, there was an understanding that, or beginning to be an understanding that the recovery really is going to depend on new approaches, new companies, and new solutions. So if there was ever a time for innovation to take front and center, this is it. Let's go. And so here you see, and I encourage you to go on the Chamber's website. In fact, there was just the annual meeting of the Chamber right before this that I was listening into, where they were talking about their recharge and recovery effort. And what we've done at Ben Franklin is to map our work and how innovation can support the goals of the recovery strategy. And so there you see the 5 goals of the recovery strategy. And what we want to do is make sure that we're aligning the efforts with our technology companies to help support the achievement of these goals that have been identified by the region at large. Okay, let's go to the next. And this is a wonderful opportunity. This whole strategy is a wonderful opportunity to begin to connect it to the work of ImpactPHL. And I think Margaret Bradley's on the phone, I saw here, on our Ben Franklin staff, who's a member of the board of ImpactPHL and for Ben Franklin leading this effort. Here we're talking about the recovery strategy is really a strategy that for the first time in my observation in seeing various regional strategies is not talking about real estate. It doesn't talk about one building being built. It's talking about what has to happen in the region's behavior. And so at Ben Franklin, we've been talking for several years now about what's the impact beyond the innovation. Innovation is wonderful, but what impact is it going to have on the community and on the community's well-being? And so now you see a regional strategy for recovery coming forth that really is asking that question. What are we going to do to improve the community, not how much investment or what's the next new building that we're going to build? And so I think there's a wonderful opportunity here to connect the goals of ImpactPHL with this recovery strategy and innovation. So for once, I'd like to see these 3 things come together. Let's keep going. At Ben Franklin, we have been tracking our investments according to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we've begun to talk about this for the last several years in terms of, again, the impact beyond innovation. And the rest of the slides, we can flip through them quickly, are examples of how we track that in terms of diversity. To flip through it quickly, I'm not going to go through these in depth.
Yeah, I think we're okay in time, so don't feel rushed if you do want to go through them.
That's okay. Women in innovation. Let's go. Education. These are just the sectors that we pull out in terms of these goals. Health. Okay. Energy. Environment and climate. And so as Kerry started this conversation, we do find it important to measure our success and measure our outcomes. And we have developed a quasi-experimental method to do that that's used statewide, so that we can discuss with the state and report to our stakeholders exactly what their investment in Ben Franklin is yielding. Let's go to the next slide. And so when we talk about outcomes, we talk about GSP, but we also talk about the dollars returned to the state in hard cash for every dollar that's coming into the BENs across the state. And so we were the first technology-based economic development system across the country that began to measure their efforts in this way. We've done this 5 times now. It's not a requirement of us. It's something that we do independently across the BENs, because we are committed to the same way we're looking to our companies to provide evidence of their success and their progress. We feel that we have to do the same. And so we look hard at what we're doing in terms of the differential in wages, in addition to the raw number of jobs, both primary and secondary, and then the return on investment. And to conclude, because I'd rather have time for discussion, building an innovation ecosystem doesn't stop, never stops in terms of the process. Most important, I think, is advocacy and education through every conversation that we've had, in special, even through this COVID challenge. The needs of the startup and the innovative community get lost because there's so many other needs prominent and front and center. So the need to bring that to the table and connect the dots for folks to ensure that they understand that without the innovation that's occurred in the past 10 years, you're not even going to be able to make it through this time, as we sort of have been muddling our way through. But we wouldn't even be able to have done that without that innovation. And so the players on stage keep changing. So we constantly have to advocate and educate, as we're assessing and reassessing the needs of our community. That's not something that ever stops. So there's a constant need to engage in the community, understand what the issues are, understand what the opportunities are, and try to formulate a response to it. There usually isn't a playbook because the situation continues to change. So but at the end of the day, I think it's a wonderful opportunity and to be able to do this, and a great way to serve the community. Those are the formal comments that I have, and I'd love to engage in a conversation.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll take questions and comments now. I think, there's not too, shouldn't be too overwhelming, but if you can go to the participants pane at the bottom and raise your virtual hand, that'll allow me to call on you with questions. So who would like to ask a question first? Tim, I saw you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. It seems the peer review and the COVID communication collaborations and the Impact Philadelphia groups are good for communication among entities. Is there any formal or semi-formal agreements for collaboration among community-based organizations, colleges, government agencies, specialized business support providers, to ensure there's a ecosystem that constantly is communicating and collaborating with one another? Around the country, there are many good examples where there's lots of communication among colleges, within industry groups. I'm seeking to find one that overlaps different types of providers and agencies to have a true regional, coordinated, inclusive ecosystem. In the Ben Franklin area, is there such?
Yes, I think there is not one. I think there are several. The COVID response team, the economic development group, did include business organizations, did include government, did include organizations like PACT that brings together the private investment community. So that group was not just economic development organizations, it was many people. Now, is that an ongoing thing? Probably not going to be an ongoing thing. Are there other groups though that open their doors and bring together anybody who wishes to come to an event? Yeah, there's lots of those. Is there one table consistently where everybody comes to? Probably not. I mean, the bigger your metropolitan area, the harder it is to do that. So folks splinter off and develop their own networks. And then what we try to do at Ben Franklin is to make sure that we have somebody monitoring those networks so that we can engage in different ways. But there are tables where the universities come together. There are tables where, for instance, biotechnology entrepreneurs come together. There are regional tables, like I said, with Startup Bucks, where the startup community in Bucks is getting together. I mean, the beauty of this region is we have so many groups to get together. The problem in this region is we have so many groups to get together. It is a hard job to stay on top of it, but that's just the nature of a metropolitan area.
Yeah, the mirror of that would be like Tacoma Pierce County, south of Seattle, and a metropolitan area of less than 1 million. We lack significant resources for entrepreneurs and emerging enterprises, yet we don't have the coordination. So it's kind of a mirror of what you have. And we're attempting to we have more groups than probably should help people with marketing, social media, business plans. We've yet to really have significant services in intellectual property protection, early stage venture capital, advanced concepts for production and delivery and so forth. So I'm seeking, maybe among others in the group as well, where they do collaborate among resource providers.
Yeah.
So there's a more general approach to providing specific but needed services to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there was a group years ago, well, San Diego Connect, many years ago. This is the 80s. San Diego took that approach where they were building out their community with a group called Connect. They've changed many times over the years. And then there was another one, and I believe it was South Carolina, that made it their point to bring things together like that. These were communities in South Carolina that were just beginning to start up. And so they made an effort, a concerted effort, to set the table for these various groups to come in. They're usually sponsored by either government and or business. In the Carolina case, it was business mostly that came together, put money on the table to allow this to happen. Years ago in this region, back in the 80s, together with a few others, two others, my predecessor at Ben Franklin and a fellow from the Industrial Resource Center, brought together what we called Strategy 21. And we brought together a very diverse group of individuals. No one funded us. We just decided to do this in our spare time. And then it kept growing and growing and growing, lasted for 12 years, just independently to coordinate our efforts and our dance steps. So there are lots of examples of how to do that. You need somebody to take the bull by the horns and get it going.
Thank you. Other questions? And you can also feel free to chat questions to me if you prefer, and I can ask them for you. Mark, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Thanks, RoseAnn. A lot of really interesting stuff in there, which was great. I'd like to dig in a little bit more on risk. So Ben Franklin is an early stage investor, which is fantastic. And those results you put up are very impressive. But hidden in that, I guess, is an awful lot of money that just, I don't know if wasted is the right word, but was unsuccessful.
No, never wasted.
Okay, and maybe that's the answer to it. So how do you balance that off? Would a community be better off giving a little bit of money to everybody to grow it? Or should you be tougher and hold back? Obviously, the later you invest, the more chance of success. So how do you balance that in terms of timing and where and how you divvy up the limited resources to startups?
Yeah, that is the core question. And we go through that all the time. And we're going through that again now. The view of Ben Franklin starts with what's the role of Ben Franklin and the mission. So you start with mission, and our mission is to be a catalyst for innovation in the region. So yes, we could definitely make more money if we invested later stage, but then answer a question, who's going to develop the pipeline so I can invest later? And the answer is nobody's going to do that. And so our mission is to develop that pipeline. Actually, we do very well. We have, we can talk about that another time, but we have cohorts. We assess our investment returns according to cohorts, and we compare it to national standards in terms of the performance of private venture funds. And we are better than or as equal to a lot of these funds in many of the years. So that the issue here is we don't want to lose money, which is why I talked about briefly the array of services that we put around a company once we invest, because we're not making a bet, we're making an investment. And so our job starts once that check is in the company's hands. Now, the only way we're going to get a revolver back, because we're an evergreen fund, the only way we get that dollar back is if that company succeeds. So we are very much aligned with the company's goal of success. We want that company to succeed. So we want to help that company bring in outside capital, get that intellectual property correct, do everything that they need to do so that those dollars revolve back, which is why we can give the multiple to the state. If we were just betting or distributing it, broadcast seeding, that would not happen. So we know that the model works. It's been proven over almost 40 years now. And we also know that it's been effective in bringing in, when you take a look at the stats and you see that most of the venture capital in the region today is coming from outside the region. Well, how is that coming from outside the region if we're not building the pipeline for that investment to come? So we've raised the level of venture capital that's coming into the region. And if you take a look at the stats and you see the number of early stage companies, mostly they are Ben Franklin companies. So you're not going to attract capital in unless somebody's doing that hard work of getting these companies ready for investment. The private sector is not going to do that. There's no money in it to do that for them. There's not enough of a return to do that.
Yeah, and that's certainly the challenge we're facing now as we get startup bucks up and running. Arguably, it might even be a little bit earlier than some of the Ben Franklin investments. But that challenge of how do we balance who gets what and how much do you give at what stage?
Right.
So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Paul. RoseAnn, you mentioned being a catalyst. Who would you say were the champions that kind of propagate, once you catalyze the effort, who is the champions that kind of run with it and execute and really make it happen once you catalyze the efforts?
Yeah, so we can't catalyze in a vacuum, right? So we have to have someone else who's sort of interested in the same thing. So when we talk about, we take a look at ImpactPHL was the most recent activity initiative that we catalyzed. It started, there was 3 to 4 years of conversation and socializing the concept and bringing people around the table, and then recruiting someone who didn't run away fast enough before we locked him down to be the chair, right? And so you bring a few people around the table who really are passionate about a topic and begin to move it on. I think that, when we take a look at the Alliance of Women Entrepreneurs, for instance, they used to be the Women Investment Network. At one point, they were housed at, there were women who were interested in doing this. They were housed at Ben Franklin. We did their back office, we supported them. And then after 3 years, you're sort of like your kids, you push them out of the house. It's time to grow up and leave. We did the same thing with Campus Philly. Actually, it was a professor from Temple, Carolyn Adams, if you remember Carolyn, and Carol, I remember from Philadelphia University, I'm blanking on her last name right now, but had gotten some support from a foundation and came to Ben Franklin and said, look, we have no place to put this money. Can you help us? And so we ended up doing that, and then housing Campus Philly and working with them and providing some support, and then grow strong enough and out the door you go. So it's never just us. Sometimes it is, but if it's our idea, then we're going to bring others. We test it and see is there sufficient community interest to get something going. There are times when you try to do something and there isn't community pickup. And if there's not going to be sufficient amount of community pickup, it tells me it's not the right time. impact didn't just happen 4 years ago. I started tracking impact in the year 2000. I remember it well. It was the year 2000. So we didn't do it until 4 years ago. So unless the community is ready to pick it up and run with it, it's the wrong timing.
Great, thank you. Patrick, go ahead.
I'll take myself off of mute. I am just typing out a Carolyn Adams article, RoseAnn, that I want to share with the group, but that's not my question.
Make sure you send it to me, please.
I will. She was quoted in the Inquirer for why Philly is still America's poorest big city, and it's because of this income gap that you talked about earlier. There's not enough middle wage jobs and high earning jobs. But my question was around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so from what I understand, you came to that decision on your own. And I think that that's very admirable. But I wonder, do you ask your investments to consider such goals? Or is it simply what you're measuring, knowing that if you measure it, it might improve anyway?
Now, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask Margaret Berger Bradley, who's on this call, who's my lead on this one. And by the way, I have to say, Carolyn was my professor. She was an amazing woman for me, and someone I admire forever. So I have to give her a shout out. I would not be what I'm doing today were it not for Carolyn. So
yeah,
that's so cool.
Margaret, answer that question.
Okay, and I got to tell you, I've been in Philly for 27 years, and the number of people who've said that about Carolyn is quite a crowd. It would be a beautiful dinner party for all the people who have said that she is that to them. So
let's do
I
that.
hope somehow she hears this recording.
Would you do that? I will be there.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I know many people, Ira Goldstein, my old colleague as well, who hold her in that same regard.
All right.
So you can share that back with her, that she got glowing feedback at 3:51 on 10/29.
Margaret Bradley. Yep. Okay.
It was a great question about the Sustainable Development Goals. And the interesting thing is, for Ben Franklin was investing in these areas: health, environment, energy, ed tech, and other civic technologies long before there was talk of Sustainable Development Goals. So really what we're doing is we're trying to signal to the market that we're interested in these areas, but we're listening to what innovations are there. And we are tagging then in our own, to be nice and wonky, our Salesforce instance, which goal a company is attached to. And then we will track key performance indicators attached to that. So if an education company is applying, we'll pay attention then to its intended impact on improved college retention rates.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a group like this crowd, you could very quickly figure out, and what difference does it make financially to an individual or to society for someone to have debt and get a degree versus debt and never get a degree, right? So that's one of the easiest to do. But the more our companies can articulate that, not only are we looking for it, we have some partners, investment partners, who are looking for it, and there are investors all over the world that have this SDG alignment and these impact goals embedded. So if these companies can get sharper at articulating that value proposition, they could be more attractive to investors elsewhere. Does that answer, Patrick?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you both.
Great, thank you. And you can tell you two work together, because right as RoseAnn was talking about investing in kids, Margaret was also chatting a comment about that, investing in early stage ventures is like investing in kids. Jonathan, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks. John Mercer from Startup Bucks, which Mark Mitchell was talking about earlier. Question about, as we're starting Startup Bucks and curating the community and entrepreneurs and that, what recommendations do you have on whether you call it curating, sourcing, marketing, scouting, but finding those entrepreneurs that either through the accelerator fund, the Bucks Built Accelerator Fund we're launching to provide funding and support to, or just to present and kind of be part of the community. What recommendations do you have on that, on finding them and also helping them find you?
Well, I think if you're very clear about what you're looking for and what you want, and put that out there, they're going to find you. There is a shortage of early stage capital out there, especially the kind of dollars that you're talking about. You're not going to have trouble finding those companies. I think you just have to be very clear about what you're looking for, and communicate that, and word will spread. We'll see, Ben Franklin will see at least 1,000 companies a year. I mean, we have the capacity maybe to invest in 25. I mean, if there's no shortage of innovation out there, there's a shortage of capital.
And you have a lot of those. Are they too early for Ben Franklin?
You want me to kick them over
Exactly.
to you? Absolutely.
You know
I know where you're going. Not a problem. Absolutely not a problem. That's
Beautiful.
why, are we not on your board?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Are we not on your review committee?
Yeah.
Why do you think we are there?
Couldn't do it
Because
without
we
you,
want to
RoseAnn.
grab from what's going on around the region. That's what the partnerships are, right?
Exactly. And then
So
we'll
the
boost
more
them
that
up
our
to get to
people
you.
are
Yeah.
around the region in the counties where the innovators are beginning to gather, we are purposely there so that we can bring them in then and call them in and bring them into our portfolio for sure. You're our feeders.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions? Got about 5 minutes left with RoseAnn.
Great.
I have a question.
Okay.
My personal vision is that someday ImpactPHL isn't needed because impact business and normal business fuse together, and every company is thinking about its impact and, you know, the ways it can be more sustainable and equitable, and make an impact in the community. Do you think that that's an appropriate vision, or is that problematic to, you know, expect normal businesses to be looking at impact?
I don't think it's outrageous. I think it's fine to have that as a vision. Will it ever happen? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm still waiting for the day that Ben Franklin won't be needed, you know. But it could be. It could very well be. I'll tell you, when we started, one of the things that we started back in the year 2000 was the Nanotechnology Institute. And the idea then was to really pull together a very comprehensive approach with multiple institutions. We had 13 universities under a common intellectual property policy. Those of you who have ever dealt with universities and intellectual property policies can understand how difficult that can be to do. But in any event, that was a very comprehensive approach. And we met then with Smalley, who since passed, but he was Nobel Prize on nanotechnology. And I remember going at dinner with him, and he, you know, this was recently after we had recently launched the NTI, and it was going great. And he said, you know, he said, it's not going to be needed in about 5 years. He said, understand that it's going to go away. I said, well, why? Yeah, very defensive. Why? I mean, it's been all this time creating this thing. He said, no, your success is going to be when it's so ubiquitous a technology that's not going to need it. There's not going to be a need to pull it separately anymore. And that does happen. That absolutely happens with initiatives that we've had where it becomes so commonplace that you don't need to pull it out anymore. So yes, there is hope. It can happen. With innovation, I think with us, it shouldn't ever end because there should always be more innovation coming. With something like impact, it is something that can absolutely be absorbed into the system, as it were. For sure.
Great. Any other final questions for RoseAnn?
Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. RoseAnn does have to run, so she won't be with us during the networking, but we will be all discussing and thinking about your wonderful ideas and experiences that you shared with us. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye, everyone.